All right. Hi, everyone. We've got a special uh, vlog, Pearls of Wisdom here for today. I've got my good friend and colleague Jim Elliott from Northwestern University down in Chicago here with me today. And we're going to talk a little bit about an upcoming special issue for the Journal of Orthopedic and Sports Physical Therapy, specifically on whiplash, that Jim and I and our friend and colleague Dr. Michele Sterling from Australia has also been involved with. So, Jim, people know who you are.
It's great to be here with you, David. And yeah, it's been fun. Dave and I have had the good chance to work together for quite a few years now, both primarily aligned with traumatic neck pain, but certainly expanding our horizons quite a bit. And geez, it was about a couple of years ago, I guess it's not quite 2 years ago now, that I'd reached out to Dave and said, with the great support of Guy Simoneau, the previous editor-in-chief at JOSPT, and Haxby Abbott, the current editor, that they were willing and really excited about welcoming us and certainly Michele to guest edit probably one of the largest collections of interdisciplinary papers on whiplash to date. And it's exciting. Part one has come together quite nicely, as you know, with some hard yards work from everybody for sure. And then part two, which we'll highlight a little bit about the contents of both special issues here in a bit. But part two is in the works for looking like either early February or March time in 2017.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Jim. And I think before we really delve too much into it, it's absolutely worth just highlighting the point you just made, which is that without the help of Guy Simoneau and even Haxby Abbott and the team at JOSPT, this would have been a far more monumental task and probably not doable without their support. So let's just
Yeah.
start by one more time recognizing their inputs. So I just want to I'm just going to sort of lead into this here, Jim. I think one of the most interesting things that I've found about putting this issue together is that we really tried hard to bring, I'm going to call it sort of non-traditional disciplines into the JOSPT fold. We've got biomechanists, we've got some patient advocates, people who maybe aren't necessarily academics, but who've done a lot of hard work behind the scenes to try and raise awareness of things like distracted driving. And I know that you played a big role in reaching out to these folks. I wonder if you could speak quickly about your experiences in trying to get people who might not have even ever heard of JOSPT to in fact contribute a paper to this special issue.
Yeah, it's a good point, Dave. I appreciate that. And as you well know, we've all sat around the campfire talking about how to put this together in an interdisciplinary fashion. And one in particular was, taking it from the prevention piece of motor vehicle collisions. As we all know, distracted driving, drink driving, is a monumental problem around the world. I think both you and I and some of our colleagues would be quite happy to know that we have less work to do in this world, because it would probably mean many of these preventable injuries are not happening, and
For
preventable
sure.
death in some cases. So that led into really, I'm amazed by social media and Karen Bowman, who is a grassroots effort organizer. She runs Drop It and Drive out of Vancouver. Karen is just a champion advocate for changing human behavior. And I know that sounds like a pretty damn hard task, but she's done a beautiful job at collaborating with provincial governments in Canada, certainly throughout the United States, and raising the awareness of the dangers of distracted driving from frankly, a personal experience of her own and her family. But she's been fantastic to work with. And she was delighted when I reached out and said, look, the journal's very happy for you to contribute an editorial about all the efforts in your domain and certainly around the world. And she's put together a very nice editorial on raising awareness, and really, I think, more of a call for action for the readership of JOSPT to say, geez, these are great examples of how I could get my clinic involved, how I could be more involved in my community, in being a real advocate for safe driving and road safety. So that's I think going to be a really unique editorial for this special issue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Jim, and I just to hook on to that, sometimes as physios, it's easy for us to get a little bit secular in our views and sort of focus on our sort of day-to-day clinical role and focusing on our treatment techniques, or making sure we get our billing codes right and things like that. But I think you've just touched on what's really important in this world, and that's kind of that social justice aspect, where we're all sort of players here in a much bigger game. And I quite agree with what you said earlier on, that, geez, it would be lovely if we woke up tomorrow and said someone solved whiplash, or someone has solved motor vehicle collisions, because I'd be quite happy to to turn over a new leaf and take a completely different direction, knowing that there's a lot of people out there who don't needlessly suffer. So I think that's very cool, and I'm hopeful that a number of the readership will take a look at that paper and exactly as you say, think, what could I be doing to get involved in these kinds of movements. And then as I go from there, I sort of look through again the papers we've got, and we go take it right from the social justice side all the way down to the level of microRNA and Sarah Lindstadt's paper, and pretty well everything in between. Since you were sort of monumental in driving this forward, talk to us a little bit how you decided on what the different topics should be covered in this issue.
Yeah, I think before we even get to Sarah's excellent basic science paper, we should talk about this. How does it go from preventing injuries, and that involves grassroots efforts, and then what happens when someone has been actually involved in and injured in a motor vehicle crash? So as you know, we've got two renowned biomechanist engineers who are very actively involved in prevention of motor vehicle collisions and safer cars. Improve seat geometry, what sort of work has been done to help mitigate some of the injuries, and really the kinematics of the occupants inside the car. Like, what their big thing is obviously preventing these injuries as well. But in those papers, it'd be great. That's from Paul Levanchik at Yale and Brian Stemper up at the Medical College in Wisconsin. And then we lean it right into our good friend who Mark Courtney, who's an emergency room physician here at our Level 1 Trauma Center at Northwestern. We see roughly 6,000 some odd patients a year for motor vehicle collisions. We have a very low threshold for the EMS to be dispensed in Chicago. It's certainly not unique to Chicago. There's many large cities around the world where it's a very similar story. But I think Mark provides a very unique perspective as to what does this mean to the emergency room physician? And then what is the roles, I guess, of the emergency room physician once that patient is, medically cleared and determined to be stable? What's the message that those patients are getting, as they leave the emergency medicine department? I think he's done a very nice job at opening up that conversation, if you will, to physios, and what role might we have in primary care scope. And I'm looking forward to see what kind of discussion comes around from Mark's paper.
Yeah, for sure. I love the idea of bringing the physio into this sort of a acute and emergency care environment.
And to Mark's credit, he, I just sort of serendipitously, I guess, looked up some evidence and came across a paper by Scott Farrell, who is a postdoc with Michele now in Australia. Scott wrote a lovely opinion in a medical journal in Australia a couple years ago about the role of physiotherapy in the emergency medicine department.
Yep.
And I remember Mark calling me up and saying, I'm really excited about this paper I found. And I says, well, lo and behold, Scott Farrell is also an author of a paper in special issue. So it just kind of came together quite nicely.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then, as I say, we've got, you've mentioned biomechanists, we've got physios on board, of course, we've got patient advocates. And then I guess just, I'm looking at sort of how we draw the thread. How did you get from here down to the sort of basic science level in putting this all together? And where did we decide sort of the barrier or the boundaries of physio end? And, we're getting too far somewhere, into the weeds.
Yeah, well, obviously, as you know, this was a team effort, and so a lot of good discussions with you and Michele and Guy and Haxby, and then our friend Sam McLean, who, he and Sarah Lindstadt work very closely together in North Carolina. And Sarah has just done some wonderful basic science work, and I'm sure, I think her paper is going to be one of those that you might want to read 2 or 3 times, actually, and get a real good handle about how does the stress system factor into these people's persistent pain-related disability. And that's an area you're much more involved in than I am, Dave. But I think her paper is going to do a really a really nice number, I think, in bringing a lot of this together. I think we constantly think of this as a biomechanical, pathomechanical type injury, and in some cases it certainly may be, but in others maybe it's not. That people who continue to have persistent levels of pain and disability, this opens up a lovely new door to the basic science of our clinical practice.
No, absolutely. And I'm really glad you answered that way. That's kind of what I was hoping to hear you say. And I think both you and I are advocates for expanding the world, I guess, excuse me, of physical therapy. And I think that's one thing that we've really managed to do here with this special issue. And what I'm hoping personally to get that readers get out of this is they start to sort of look at these conditions. In this case, it's whiplash from a number of different viewpoints, from whether it's the emergency room physician, from the basic scientist, the biomechanist, the social advocate. And I think it's time that we expand our horizons. So I couldn't be more excited by the content that we've got in this particular issue. And what's our target launch date for the first issue? Do you remember?
So we're all systems go for October 1st issue of JOSPT. There's a couple other papers that we probably need to mention in there that will be in the roster, and that's one from an engineer, Gunter Sigmund and Ben Elkin in Canada. We've heard for years, Dave, about this idea that, some people who have a whiplash, maybe they've also had a concussion. And then also some people who've had a sports-related concussion, they may have some neck issues. And this, to my knowledge, and I could be wrong, but to my knowledge, Gunter and Ben's paper has done an interesting job at reconciling brain strains from helmet-to-helmet impact in American football to wrapping your head over the head restraint and causing the potential concussive type injury. So that'll be that should be one that gets some discussion as well.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and you're quite right, and that's something that I know you and I have both talked about in the past, and we've both even started to work in those areas a little bit. So it's exciting to see that kind of thing coming forward. And I know we're certainly not the first ones. So that's
no, not at all.
And then, so just a quick nod to the second issue, because this is a two-part special issue. As you mentioned, the first one's coming out October 1st, and we hope people can watch out for that. And then do you want to give us a quick teaser? We'll certainly do this again before the second issue comes out, but what kinds of things can you look forward to in issue 2?
Well, before we sneak into the second issue, I will say that I'm really delighted that our good friend Gwen Joel has decided to write the editorial for this part 1 issue. And as you know, we and Michele, we've read this, and it's typical Gwen. It's actually just a lovely sort of foundational paper of where we've been, what we're doing now, and where we need to go. So she'll lead off our first special issue with her editorial, which is great. And then hopping right into part 2, this is, again, as you say, a list of authors that you probably wouldn't typically see in JOSPT's roster, which is kudos to Haxby and Gee for being open to such a wide variety of authors. We have a couple of lawyers writing a paper for us about the stress of going through a compensation or litigation type system and its influence on someone's pain. What else do we have in there? We've got Michele and Linda Carroll and Nick Sullivan will be writing a very nice on-balance paper of the psychological factors that can and probably do drive the clinical course of a lot of these folks. Julie Fritz is very kindly agreed to write an editorial for this about, what have we learned in low back pain, and what have we learned about big data, and how can big data be utilized perhaps in whiplash. I think that's just a great call, because obviously Julie is a luminary in the field, and we can learn an awful lot about what she's already done way before us, which would be good. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Those are big shoes to fill.
Oh, absolutely. And as you know, we've got some more basic science papers in part 2. Beth Winkelstein's group in University of Pennsylvania, and they'll be talking a lot about their rodent model in whiplash and some of the challenges of quantifying facetogenic pain. But their work has been, as you know, monumental in helping to translate animal work to human patients.
Yeah, fantastic. And I suppose we might as well, we'd be take the quick opportunity to say that we do each have a paper ourselves coming out in the issue, and I know we're both very excited by them. Something, whether it's be on imaging or whether it be on the traumatic injuries distress scale, I think we're rather proud of those as well, and we hope people will spend a brief moment at least reviewing those and maybe engaging in some dialogue, because I think there's some exciting things to be said in both of those. All right. Well, this is great. I hope that's gotten people's appetites whetted just a little bit. Do you have any final comments you'd like to make around this whole experience, Jim, and what people can look forward to?
Oh, I just think it's really exciting once again to have the support of the JOSPT, because the readership is clearly beyond the boundaries of North America. I mean, it's an international journal. It's a high impact journal. They've been fantastic in supporting my efforts, your efforts, and Michele's efforts, and just really looking forward to seeing these come to fruition.
Fantastic. Absolutely. Oh, well, Jim, thanks. I really appreciate your time this afternoon, and we'll let you go, but I hope we can do this a little bit more in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks, David.
All right, cheers.
Good to see you.
You too.
See you, pal.